Fardad, thank you for coming in. You have this marvelous career as a serial entrepreneur, doing so many marvelous things in the use of technology now with KUDO. So let's share some of those insights with the audience, and thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the key areas that my audience is always interested in is, what were those inflection points that made this marvelous career that you have, this wonderful person where you're contributing in so many different dimensions across so many different areas. And it could be something that happened when you were really young, let's say 3 or 5, something in the family, could have been a teacher, could have been exposure, traveling, or maybe some things that happened in your career. What were those 2 or 3 magic moments in your life?
Great question. It's very I remember exactly the time. So I grew up in Iran. I was a teenager in very like mid-80s, and this is when my dad was at war between Iran, Iraq. And this is right after Iranian Revolution when the war started. And for me, the watching Security Council meetings as a 14-year-old was pretty much the only hope I had for passing a ceasefire resolution for this war to be stopped, so my dad could come back. And in those meetings, I was always fascinated by listening to these conversations in multiple languages and how live language interpretation would work for really creating a seamless communication amongst world leaders. So for me at that point, the UN was the savior of my dad and me being able to spend time with my dad as a teenager. This war lasted about 8 years. My dad spent about 72 months at the war, during the war, and coming home every 45 days. So for me, it was a moment that, okay, if I can, at some point, I want to give back around the language and technology. And that's kind of what led me to spend 25 years, pretty much entire adult life, in the space of technology and language.
So now I can see the connection of the UN about the translation services and so on. So did you have an interest in technology even when you were a teenager? Were you curious about science and so on, or did that come later in life?
Yeah, my initial mentor was my uncle, who was studying double E electrical engineering. So I kind of followed his footsteps, studied double E in Tehran, and then when I moved to California, I did my grad school in computer science. But honestly, from early on, I never worked as an engineer. My very first career was starting my first company, Media Vision, out of San Francisco, where we were providing equipment for language interpretation. So I always used my 7-8 years of studies as an engineer to be able to really understand what it takes to build products. At the same time, really bridging the gap with users and the experience of the product, and also those behind the scene, really coding and programming and building hardware solutions as well.
I can see why family has been so integral to your life. I mean, from the UN standpoint and how it opened your eyes for young, and then you said, you know what, I'm really enamored with what the UN does, and so you do a lot of work with the UN. And then you have an uncle who's an electrical engineer. So when people hear the term, some people may not understand double E means electrical engineer. And that got your interest in electrical engineering, which is very practical. It's a very practical form of engineering, but also on the leading edge, the cutting edge of what's possible, right? It's also a very difficult program, very math oriented. And then you took that background to become an entrepreneur, to invent things, create new kinds of technologies, form companies. So I can see this route. So when in 2016 you co-founded Avatronics. Can you talk about that company?
Yes, this is a company that I actually supported the initial investment and co-founded with two great partners. Um, it's a business around basically noise canceling technology. It's a deep tech company. I have been on the board since year two when we created the board, and I have not been operating in the business. The CEO and the CTO are the ones operating. Really looking at creating a more quiet world as a mission. As you know, the noise is one of the biggest threat right now, especially in large metropolitan cities or in transportation or even in some of the work environment. The company is doing really well, which is around like licensing the technology with key partners, whether on the chip level or on the product level as well.
Yeah, and I can see how this background, again, in 2012, you're part of the design and rollout of a complete makeover of the United Nations meeting facilities. You played a key role in supporting, high-end equipment to various iterations of the IMF and the World Bank and their annual meetings and European institutions. And that background then helped when you co-founded Avatronix, and then you're into active noise canceling. Again, it's about sound and voice and so on. So there's this common thread, right? And then in 2017, you founded KUDO. Can you talk about KUDO?
Yeah, so overall, as entrepreneurs, we very much, maybe sometimes too much, focus on problems and really the pain points. So UN was, as I said, from my teenage time, being always kind of my lighthouse, right? Always looking forward to do something with the UN. So in 2011, when I got notified that we got awarded to renovate the UN, so I decided to move to New York from San Francisco to spend 1 year supporting this project. A multi-million-dollar project, about $2 billion capital for renovating the entire buildings. And instead of, I think, 3 years, it took 6 years, typical construction projects with all the challenges. While, of course, I really felt this project was very rewarding for me, but I also noticed that there is a big opportunity for creating a product, a solution that is a lot more accessible. Not everybody has the real estate, the resources, the use case of the UN. What if we build a product, let's call it UN in the cloud, that businesses can use, educators can benefit from? So that was kind of while of course I was very on the moon during this project, I felt there should be a better way. There should be an easier way to really bring language, the missing L in DI, in the businesses, in the corporate America, in the higher ed. So that kind of triggered the thought process, the idea behind KUDO. So 2017, we started writing the first line of code. It took us about 18 months to release our version 1 of the product. This is in end of 2018. And because coming from the background, knowing the use cases, so we had the product market fit very early on, having users using the product.
And you work, I mean, it integrates, I mean, I walked through a demo of the product, and it's really quite interesting. I can see the UN roots in there,
yeah,
where it can marry with the UN system, and yet it doesn't need the UN system. It can sit in any organization company worldwide who needs this kind of fluency of being able to interact with each other, no matter what the language is, and to do it in a very sort of intuitive, easy way, so that it's a very, very accessible. And you're using AI as part of that. So when did you get interested in AI?
So within KUDO, we had like three major stages of evolvement, right? We started with the platform. At the time, our platform was the only platform where you can have video calls with built-in language interpretation. Then we realized that, okay, we have this really unique delivery platform for multilingual meetings, but how can I find qualified interpreters for somebody who doesn't know how to look for interpreters? Do I use Google? Do I use Craigslist? What do I use to source interpreters? The business has been very much like travel agency, calling agency, asking for pricing, asking for availability. So we built this enterprise-ready B2B marketplace, one side qualified, vetted interpreters, and the other side, all video platforms, right? So we built that. And then we saw the growth of multilingual meetings because we just made something easier for people to use. But then our journey didn't stop there because human interpretation, as much as with accessing through our marketplace and through different platforms, it's a lot more accessible, but still it costs. It costs a few $100s an hour, and also availability is a case. Our view is language is a barrier for people if it's not there for their personal and professional growth. And for us to really make this accessible, we went back again to technology. So we've been working on AI for the last 2.5 years. Of course, artificial intelligence and language is an area that many big tech companies are working on. What we bring in is how we differentiate ourselves with addressing the nuance of language, trying to mimic how live human interpretation works, to be able to add the meaning, not word by word, and also being able to create this simultaneously and customization depending on the vertical. For example, our clients are using our solution to be able to add their own vocabulary glossaries for their acronyms, their keywords, the names, numbers, and so on, in a way to be able to increase the accuracy. And also latency is a big challenge when it comes to speech-to-speech, to create the latency. Our latency today is around like 4.2 seconds. Human interpretation is, depending on the language, sometimes it could be about 2 seconds. So we still have opportunities to improve and become better. But quite an exciting time for AI, as we see a lot of growth potential. Only when you think about it, about 20% of the world's population, they speak English. And there are a lot of excitement around increasing engagement in hybrid and online meetings. And we see this adding AI, whether speech-to-speech or speech-to-text, is really creating that inclusion and also opportunity for productivity in corporations as well as non-for-profits.
Yeah, this idea of text-to-speech and speech-to-text has been around for a long time, and including translation, and it's been around for a number of years. What would you consider to be some of the sort of the breakthroughs that have occurred on this speech understanding, and then multi-language.
Yeah. So definitely the tech, the AI as a whole has had a tremendous progress in the last 12 to 18 months, whether it's a speech to text translation, or text to speech. So for us, we see better and quicker access to large language models, and also better technologies on the speech to text. What we do, which is our KUDO kind of a superpower, is being able to create human-like translation in a building model, predicting what's coming next based on what's being said, and also restructuring the sentences to create the most or the closest translation to human interpreters. That's really our superpower. That's where we have our patented technology, and we love to integrate with different voices, and of course there's a lot of plans for us on voice cloning and unlimited voices and so on.
I see. So when you saw the release of ChatGPT last year, about a year ago now, what was your reaction?
Of course, like everybody, very happily surprised and very fascinated by ChatGPT. We actually integrate on our version 2.5 with GPT 3.5 to increase even the quality of the output of KUDO AI. And we see this as a great technology complement for us to be able to use a large language model to create a better experience for the users.
And then are you looking at, GPT-4 Turbo, GPT-4 Vision? It's interesting. They have this thing called Chat GPT Builder.
Yeah.
It's evolving so quickly. And that must be exciting for you, but also be bewildering, or not bewildering, but present challenges perhaps, or maybe more opportunities.
Yeah, we see this very much opportunity for us, because we don't see this as a threat, but as an opportunity. As we said, we're using this. I the other day I saw a custom ChatGPT built by our head of sales in APAC, sharing, hey, I built a new GPT for our internal sales team to be able to look at all of our databases and answer customers' questions quicker. So we see this both as a user, but also as an add-on technology integration with our existing KUDO AI to create a better experience for our customers.
So from a tech stack standpoint, I don't know if you can get into this, or do you make use of Microsoft at all on the Azure platform, or?
Yeah, so Azure, definitely. Also, Google Voice is also very exciting for us. These are, again, the deep tech. We're not here to reinvent the wheels. We're bringing really our knowledge on language. It's part of our DNA to be able to create a better product that provides a better user experience. So all the Azure, AWS, Google, these are for us, as much as they develop and bring exciting opportunities, it's just going to help us to achieve our goals, which is creating an end-to-end solution for better accessibility for language for customers.
Yeah, and then you'll be doing this for such a long time. And, as you mentioned, in 2012, you were part of this multi-billion-dollar sort of refactoring of the United Nations meetings facilities. When you're part of that complete makeover, what were some of the big challenges? And then how did it open up your thinking about some of the opportunities as well? Because after that, that's when you started forming these other companies, right, to address the issues, the challenges. So,
Yeah, I've been told I'm not focusing too much on positive. I'm focusing a lot on problems, right? I'm going to share you a story. So, in addition to the UN, of course, we learned a lot during that project. We also started working on the UN Geneva, but many other large organizations. One of our customer was the IMF, World Bank. I was in Lima, Peru in 2015 or 2016 for the annual meeting. These annual meetings, every 4 years, they travel to a new country, a host country. This was in Lima, 16,000 delegates, finance, basically head of finance. They all traveled to Lima. And it was a Friday. The Japanese finance minister wanted to speak for 20 minutes. And his go-to Japanese interpreter was based in Washington, D.C. And the idea was bringing the interpreter to Lima for that 20-minute interpretation. And speaking with the project kind of a manager, that was about $8,000 expense at that time to book it, travel to get this interpreter into Lima for that 20 minutes. That was for me an aha moment of we have the technology. We should be able to bring this interpreter remotely to this meeting without going through all the expenses and so on. And of course, this is all kind of a building blocks towards my next venture, which is KUDO, as we know.
Right. So, I mean, and what you saw was that at the time you had to physically have the interpreter present, and you thought you shouldn't have. That it's true. It's kind of like a lot of time and expense,
Yeah.
and you enabled to do this electronically, right? Through virtually in essence, and then from there, once you understood that you could do this virtually and create the seamless environment through technology, then you thought, gee, we could add AI to that to add even an enhanced kind of capability to augment interpreters, but also you can use them in place of interpreters as well, right? AI, but doing it in a fashion from all the learnings that you of how interpreters work, so that it felt natural and wasn't a break from the traditional kind of feeling of how interpreters work, right?
Exactly. Definitely, it helps us to build products that are going to add access. We are a firm believer that AI and human are going to coexist when it comes to language and interpretation. There are a number of meetings, a number of reasons that we believe that, depending on the type of meeting. Is it a meeting that's going to be a lot of decisions to be made? Is it a due diligence call? Is it a training, awareness, town hall meeting? For example, going back again to the UN use case, UN operates in 6 official languages, English, French, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. So the entire organization is budgeted and built around these 6 languages. But we have number of countries that they speak different languages. And definitely AI could add accessibility and more engagement for those that they don't speak any of these 6 languages. I love to my relatives in Iran who speak Farsi to be able to log in and listen to the UN session in their own language, or somebody living in Turkey or in India. So these are like areas that I see accessibility. But is AI gonna replace the Security Council meeting? I would never say no, but definitely not in near future, right?
So what has been the reaction to, I mean, there's over 40 UN agencies. There's the UN out of New York. And because I work with different agencies, they're somewhat independent bodies. Do you find that there's a common communication body that you deal with within the UN that handles all of that communication, or do you have to individually go out to each agency and say, "Hey, we have this solution," and then negotiate with them, and then and so what's kind of the logistics aspect of dealing with the UN, and then what has been the feedback from the UN as they are starting to onboard more aspects of what you do, right? So,
Yeah. So definitely, while UN and other large institutions are on our radar, but they're not on our immediate kind of a target. And the reason is historically, these institutions, it takes longer for adoption to new technologies, but also the level of comfort should be there, the level of confidence should be there. I believe when it comes to AI, artificial intelligence, there is a bit of a time to adopt, and people, they need to trust the technology. Our very much focus is around uh, uh, corporate America or non-for-profits, educations, as well as many, we have about like 2,000 people today that they have an account and they're using our AI. And we have some of the very well-known global brands that they're using AI for their day-to-day meetings. But they are using AI not as a replacement to human interpretation, as a first time that they're providing language access for their participants. Um, we have a bit of an unfair advantage compared to any other AI company because we have a marketplace of human interpretation with 12,000 interpreters as a one solution. And we have a AI that provides 30 plus languages. So we're able to really come in and not really push for solution one or solution two, but share really as a consultant the pros and cons of each and really have the end user deciding what makes sense. Many of our customers, they use both technologies for different use cases, right? Oh, I know exactly what meeting I'm going to use human interpretation. And at the same time, I know where I want to add AI. So it's a bit of a learning process for us as well, because there are some of our customers that they come with new use cases that we never thought about, right? I have these visitor centers and I want my visitors to come in and be able to ask any questions. I have this showroom that I want them to scan a QR code and be able to communicate with my rep, right? So a lot of use cases that coming from their users. So we're trying to stay very close to these users to be able to understand better what the opportunities are, where the limitations are, and try to build around that.
so that's really fascinating. I mean, you're addressing a market need. You definitely have a lot of expertise in this area, dating back for a long, I mean, really decades in a way, right? Because just your cultural background and so on, and then this ability to create hybrid environments because you have these relationships with all of these interpreters that are out there. You have the virtualization technology where you can have interpreters, but they don't have to fly anywhere to do interpretation. And then you also have AI, and you're continually fine-tuning that, improving its capabilities. And the advantage there is then you can, it's sort of unlimited, right? Anytime you use technology, and you've blended this all into an environment which can have, it can replicate the kind of feelings that the UN wants to have, and yet it could adapt to any kind of circumstance, whether it's a nonprofit or a corporation, and so forth. So that's a great sort of arc in your career of starting with this idea of UN and going into interpretation and language and how it's being held, managed, into managing noise and so on. Okay, now let's shift gears, and I want to shift gears into two areas, and that is you're a double E. You're an entrepreneur. You use the latest technology. You solve real problems. Let's kind of forecast where you think that's going. So we're going to do a little bit of live brainstorming in that area. And then you're also YPOer, so I want to sort of understand that journey as well for our audience. So first of all, where do you think all of this is going? So you saw all of the news, with OpenAI and Sam Altman, and then there was this thing called Q Star, and people are thinking artificial general intelligence, and then you see Apple releasing their Vision Pro earlier this year, where people thought, gee, where is that going? Like the metaverse, that term isn't so widely used, but the immersive environments and digital twins are still progressing. Do you think so? I'd like to get your thoughts on where you think, where that is going in the next 5 years. Do you think that we're going to have artificial general intelligence? Do you think we're going to be to embody that into robots? Like Tesla has a robot. OpenAI has invested in robots, which is going to have some of this large language models powering them. Do you think, what do you think about those trends if you were to kind of look into the future? And that's going to influence what happens with you. Maybe in the future, KUDO will have robotic interpreters or something like that as well.
Definitely, it's all fascinating, very exciting. Keeps us all up at night when we hear the progress, when we're witnessing some of the progress, some area we are at the forefront of those development. At the end of the day, my view is that every technology that we build as innovators, as technology companies, we're solving one problem, which is human connection, right? We want to be able to connect better. We want to be more efficient. We want to be more, bring more opportunities for better society, better living, better growth opportunity for us, better education for next generation. And what I like to express my opinion is only the area that I have expertise, which is language, right? In that area, I can see language is going to be or should be on the forefront of all the technologies that you mentioned, because we are just becoming more and more connected than ever before and less patient to wait until something is localized in our own language, less patient to be able to hear what was the latest news, what was the latest development. So we want to really communicate quicker and have access to the information quicker with a good quality. And that's really our focus. Right now, pretty much 65% of companies, they experience lack of engagement through their employees. And because whether they attend the meetings and they're not fully engaged, the content is not right there, or they just don't understand the language of spoken in that meeting. We have 24 billion hours of wasted meetings on an annual basis across the globe, whether in person or online. So these are like all opportunities for us. And whether we want to build a Vision Pro or we want to bring people virtually in the same room, 3D hologram, or we want to create better technologies. But at the end of the day, we think that we want people to communicate and get closer and connect better. And we see language a big barrier there. But of course, there's going to be a lot of regulations coming out. There's going to be a lot of hopefully guideline coming out to make sure that we do this in the right way, and we want to support.
What I'm hearing though is that fundamentally people have to connect, and language is the way to do it. And so you just see this as a growing sort of a marketplace, and improving the way people can connect. And so you're looking at it from that lens of language and connectivity and humanity and augmentation, right? Helping, being an assistant. So it must be pretty exciting for you to see see these things change every day.
It's very exciting, and also um, for us as a startup, we gotta stay focused, right? It's because the language and the opportunity of using our AI technology, building different products for different use cases is limitless. So there are so many use cases. We just need to stay very focused. I'm a firm believer that we got to learn to say no to be able to say good yes and deliver. So that's kind of has been the biggest challenge during my journey as an entrepreneur, is definitely to limit the scope, but really build something that that we're very confident. And still every day it's a challenge for us.
Okay, so you're a successful entrepreneur. You're a serial entrepreneur, and you've created companies. And so what would be your recommendations for, success as an entrepreneur? What are the attributes of the individual? What are the attributes of a team? What are the attributes of a startup to be successful? So team, the individual, or individual, team, and then the entity itself. What are the things that make for success?
Yeah. Great question. So the first element for an entrepreneur, in my opinion, definitely is not the idea or skill set. It's really about persistent and being able to grind and being able not to give up. That's like number one. Commitment to the vision, commitment to the business. Definitely, we don't have a lack of ideas in today's world. We definitely missing execution, the ability to execute. So being able to make decisions, not quick decisions, but make a lot of decisions and being able to execute quickly. Quick execution is very important. You can take the time to come to the decision point, not a problem. But once a founder and entrepreneur makes a decision, it's about all execution and putting all the effort, all the resources, all the focus on the team to execute. The team, I think of team as a football team, soccer team, where you need offense, goalkeeper, midfield. You need players in the team to complement one another, not to compete with one another when it comes to skill set. So what makes a very good soccer team is really about having the right players at the right position during a game. Of course, startups, they don't fail because of lack of ideas. Sometimes they have many ideas. It's about lack of execution. So for a startup, it's just to stay focused on the mission and execute with the proper funding, with the proper adoption, user adoption. So I would say, and also the market changes, right? What could be a very successful product at the beginning could turn out to be a feature by big tech companies. So the biggest challenge that I see is how to always innovate and have a product that could differentiate from others and also defensible enough in the market, right? And that's a challenging part, right? Because it's a constant change. And yeah, 1 year working at a startup is equal few years working at a larger company. So it's a lot of work.
You know, there's some really great tips there. And it reminds me, I read about a study where they looked at the top founders out of Harvard. I think there was about 18 or 20 of them. And they asked them, these Harvard graduates who started really successful companies, they asked them, you know, what were the keys to success? And they said it wasn't skill or tech, or it was actually persistence, resilience, being able to just work hard and just being able to stay at it, right? And you mentioned that as one of the first sort of attributes that you think people should have. And then, of course, I remember a conversation I had with this gentleman who sits on some of the boards I chair. But I remember meeting him in 2009, a very successful executive for Infosys. And I asked him, what's one key to success? He's execute. You got to, and you mentioned execution. There's, like you said, there's a proliferation of ideas out there, but unless you execute, then nothing's going to happen. And throughout the interview here, you mentioned focus, right? Don't lose focus while you're executing, and this idea of agility as well. You indicated that kind of 1 year of being a startup, it's like multiple years in a corporation. You have to be agile and constantly assessing the marketplace, and making sure you can differentiate, and somehow making sure that you can spotlight that differentiation so that people can say, hey, I want to use your company, and so much more. So, I mean, all of those things resonate from the interviews I've done and other entrepreneurs I meet. But you're a successful entrepreneur, and I know that you're part of YPO, and I know there's this sort of strict confidentiality, privacy. I don't know if you want to talk about that aspect or not. Would you like to share that journey a bit?
Yeah. Um, so one of my advisor, Alex, who's also an early investor at KUDO, he recommended YPO to me in 2019, and I joined YPO. YPO, as you remember as well, is young president organizations that we have about 28,000 members globally. I'm part of the New York Liberty chapter since 2019. And what's great about this organization is having a very close and tight network of executives and business owners and entrepreneurs, where we have a very structured forum, which is a monthly meeting. Some forums have lasted for 20 plus years. Some forum members, they're in the same members in the same forum for 20 plus years, meeting once a year, once a month for 4 hours, very structured. Every minute is counted. And we talk about everything detailed. Some areas we share information about personal, family, and business, 3 areas that we have updates, we have presentation, and I've used some of that techniques in my management meetings within my own board at the company. And it's fascinating how these people become my first call when I'm challenged by a problem, when I see an opportunity and I want to get some sounding thoughts from my peers. And these are like people I get so close to, and I respect them so much that becomes like of course, there are no business together, so we have no interest as far as financial interest in one another. And of course, there's a lot of networking events that we attend and participate. So I do recommend for any business owners out there. There's a bit of a screening process, but it's a great organization to join and learn and grow.
And just a bit of an update. I just saw an update that I guess the numbers now are about 35,000 and across over 150 countries, and there's about 500 chapters. And then you mentioned this idea of a forum, which is this is sort of very intimate sharing and under strict confidentiality, and that's kind of maybe the power, right? This intimate sharing of CEO to CEO, a peer to peer sharing, and it becomes an informal network, and yet in a way formal too, to advise you for your life, right, about every aspect of your
Every aspect.
personal, family, and business. So, and you said you recommend it, but then there is a barrier, and the barrier is that they want to make sure that you're successful to get in. So they'll check to make sure that you have certain measures of success to get in. But then what it does is once you're in, then you have an access to a tremendous network, right? So
That's right. That's right.
so
How long you been a member, Steven?
I'm actually an external that was invited in at what you call a resource.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent.
So and because I've been trying, I was invited in to help. And this is public because I interviewed the gentleman who invited me in. His name is Florian Kimmerich. And in September 2017, he said, Stephen, we're going into YPO 3.0. And because you do so much across so many different organizations, excuse me, can you meet and help us? And I said, sure. So,
Thank you for that.
so my journey with your organization is as a resource, just trying to help you and your organization, go through, some of the things that you're trying to adopt and grow and so on. But it's been really interesting meeting people like yourself who have tremendous vision, capabilities, and are executing, as you mentioned, with focus. We're down to the last few minutes of our interview personally. So we talked about your company. We talked about this organization called YPO that you're part of. It's a private membership organization. Personally, where would you like to see yourself, let's say in the next 5 years? And then I have one more question after that. So if we were to look at Fardad version 100 by 2030, what would that Fardad look like?
2030. I've been a bit, I've had a bit of a very much a focus on a same problem over the last 25 years. So kind of a trying to solve the same problem from different perspective, different businesses. So I think I'm gonna still very much focus on solving the same problem, but probably gonna add a bit of a mentorship and giving back to new generations of founders. I've already started that. So I'm advising a few startups. I'm investing in startups. This is an area I believe startups are the backbone of innovation. They really should benefit, if not, from what makes them very unique, which is speed. And I love to share what I've learned during the last 2 decades back to new generations of founders and help them. So that's kind of an area that I'm going to do more and more if the time allows, and especially in the area of software, audio, language. These are kind of enterprise software. These are the areas that I'm very excited and passionate about. Yeah, that's kind of a career-wise. As far as personally, of course, I have 2 young kids and spending time with them. So really, we speak 3 languages at home. My wife is French, so we speak Farsi, English, and French. So they continue to always fascinate me how quick learner they are. in language. My daughter now started learning Spanish as a fourth language. She's only 9 years old, and I'm quite impressed with her skill set about language. Definitely not a good opportunity for business if she speaks multiple languages in the future. I don't want to lose all my customers because they're all speaking multiple languages, but now very fascinated with that. So.
Yeah, and there's opportunities for your children with something called YNGers, right?
Yes, that's right.
For the audience, those are called YPO Next Generation. And because I've done interviews with many of your colleagues within YPO, so it's public information about YNGers. So I get, and then we're time for one last question is, what recommendation do you want to leave to the audience?
In what area? I'm sorry.
It's open. It could be
Okay.
business-wise, it could be for startups, it could be young people who are out there. By the way, when I measure my audience, the top 5 roles of my audience are CEOs, founders, board members, co-founders, and then 6 is like professors, engineers, and so on. But
Right. So I don't know if I'm well positioned to make recommendations for this vast majority of audience. I can just share some of my learnings. I really like, I really enjoy my work when I'm learning. There has been times that I felt that I'm not growing, I'm not learning, and that becomes tough days as a business owner, as a CEO. That I feel that okay, this is like the day in, day out. It's the same grind, and I'm not growing, I'm not learning. So I try to constantly learn and grow, and that keeps me excited about what I do. In my the last 6 years at KUDO, I felt that my job has been changing every 3 to 6 months. And this is just maybe the nature of startups because of the changes, the macroeconomy, the product itself, the team itself. And I like that. I like that a lot. So definitely what we do, I really value the learning and growth as one thing. And that requires us really to leave our egos behind the door when we walk into the office and really be always curious. So that's kind of a my own personal experience that I love to share.
yeah, those are great recommendations. Continually try to stretch goals and learn, and continue lifelong learning, and also as you mentioned, anytime you have a startup, you have to continue to be agile, right? And be sort of very inclusive, and look at the boundaries and keep pushing the boundaries. So, Fardad, thank you for coming in. You've got a marvelous career. You've done a lot, and you're continue to do so much more, and contributing in so many different ways. So thank you for coming in and sharing so many insights with our audience.
Thank you, Stephen, for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.